Hello and welcome to Writing Women, the show where I talk about the women who exist in fiction and the people who created them. Today we're going to take another break from Tamara Pierce and we're going to talk about some good old-fashioned romance stories. Romance books have to be a specific type of story to really hook me. There has to be some type of grand adventure along with the romance bits before I can really sink my teeth into it. Which is why it took me by complete surprise when I became completely obsessed with the Cousins O'Dwyer trilogy by Nora Roberts. Today, I'm going to mostly talk about the first book in this trilogy, The Dark Witch. Now, Nora Roberts was a name that I had seen so often I just sort of started ignoring it on bookshelves. She has written more than 200 novels, and they always seem to find their way to the back shelf at the thrift store. I'll see the older, yellowing copies of books with her name on the spine and think, oh, that's that romance lady, right? Now I'll move past those and maybe find something else. It wasn't until a friend lent me her copies of this trilogy and insisted I read them that I finally gave her a chance. This friend told me that one character in her book had the exact type of workshop and storefront that she dreamed of for an apothecary business, and after reading, I could picture it perfectly. There's this almost irresistible pull in Robert's world here that makes me want to live in it. By the time I finished The Dark Witch, I had started baking bread and stuff because reading it made me hungry for that world, and the only way to fill that void was to make homemade food that I could imagine Branna in the story making. Now, before I do a story recap, I have to apologize. You're probably going to hear some snuffling and tinkling sounds in the background, and it's because my dog is very grumpy right now, and he keeps getting up and moving around and laying down and sighing heavily. And I don't have the heart to kick him out of my room, so I apologize in advance. He's very old, so he makes a lot of noises just kind of existing in general. So now I'll do a really general story recap. We begin in the distant past with the Dark Witch, Surka. I looked it up online, and most of the pronunciation guides I saw said it was some variation of that. It's spelled Sorcha. I'm really sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. I'm trying to go by pronunciation guides, but I might still be getting it wrong. I'm bad at words. Anyway, and her 3 young children, Branna, Eamon, and Tegan. Her husband is away fighting a war, and she is tormented by an evil sorcerer named Kavan. Again, might be pronouncing it wrong, but that's what the pronunciation guide I found online said to say, so I'm just going to say that. Her husband tries to return home to her, but is trapped by Kavan and killed. Sorka makes gifts for her children, amulets with the images of their animal familiars on them, a dog, a hawk, and a horse. She sends them away before a final confrontation with her enemy. She defeats him, but he is unfortunately not fully dead because he was no longer fully human. In the present day, Iona Sheehan, a distant descendant of the Dark Witch, inherits the horse amulet and the responsibilities that come with it. She was raised in a largely loveless household except for her grandmother, who tells her about her inherited powers and of her home in Ireland. Iona sells all of her belongings, and with nothing but a suitcase, she sets off to meet her cousins, Branna and Connor O'Dwyer. They are the holders of the dog and the hawk amulet, respectively. Her cousins welcome her into the family with the love and devotion that she has never known. She gets a job at the stable of the local tourist castle, and there meets Connor and Branna's friends, Mira and Boyle, both of whom know about their friend's magic and their centuries-long struggle against the dark sorcerer. Iona immediately takes a fancy to Boyle, but we'll get to that later. She also meets Finn, the descendant of Kavan, and one time the lover of Branna. He wants to use his power to help his friends take down the sorcerer, who has fully returned now that the 3 descendants of Sorka's 3 children have united again. Iona meets her familiar, a beautiful horse named Alistair, named after her ancestor's horse. Iona learns to use her powers under Branna's tutelage and falls head over heels for Boyle. They have a budding, passionate romance, and it kind of begins to scare Boyle, who's never really felt this way about a woman, and he'd been comfortable in his gruff solo ways. One day he is venting his frustration with the situation and his inability to face his emotions, and he comments that maybe Iona was using her magic to make him love her, and she unfortunately hears the accusation. She's understandably deeply offended by it and ends their situationship. Boyle, fortunately, has a group of friends to call him an idiot and help him see why he was wrong. Those same friends also don't pressure Iona to take Boyle back, understanding that Boyle has to earn Iona's forgiveness still. They remain friends through all of this and continue working together to develop a plan to defeat Kavan. He does eventually get her forgiveness after a long period of wooing her in a more traditional way than their initial passionate but reckless romance, though. When their whole group comes together to confront Kavan on the summer solstice, they wound him, but he retreats to recover and fight again another day. Iona is gravely injured during the fight, but recovers to find a joyful Boyle who asks her to marry him. And that is where the story ends in the first book in this trilogy. That was legitimately one of the most gut-wrenching romance novels I have ever read. When Boyle angrily accuses Iona of bewitching him, I felt my heart drop. When she is devastated that he could ever, even in anger, believe her capable of such a thing, I actually physically cried over a book for the first time in years. In one of my Tamara Pierce episodes, I talk about aphantasia, which, if you haven't listened to that episode, it's the inability to visualize things in your mind. I talk about how I seem to have largely lost my ability to visualize things in my mind as an adult, and I had been in the middle of a dry period where I almost gave up on reading before my friend lent me this book to read. Nora Roberts has this ability to paint a picture with her words in such a way that I can actually see what she is writing. I can practically smell the delicious meals that Branna makes. There's an almost lyrical quality to her prose. There's a lot of repetition of certain phrases, but always for great effect. Like the characters are repeating words and phrases as a sort of spell. And considering the magical elements to the story, that makes their powers feel even more entwined in their existence when the sort of melodic quality of their words gives everything that they say an air of importance. This is a story heavily featuring destiny and powers greater than humans, but it still feels like this close and intimate conflict. That all being said, how do I feel about the women in this book? Honestly, I at first was kind of worried because I don't often like the women in romance books. I often feel like they don't have much agency in their own lives, or they exist in a realm where all of their problems can be cured if they just find the right man. Romance novels are escapist fantasy, and I get why people would want to just read about women who meet their tuxedo mask and all of their trouble melts away. It just isn't something that engages me because I usually get my escapism from other things. And that is why I think I loved this book so much. Iona is fierce and independent. She isn't traditionally girly, but never belittles other women who are. She is flawed. She has a bit of a temper and an almost crippling desire to be loved and accepted. It makes her afraid to lose everything she has the moment others are bored of having her around, because in her experience, even family doesn't love you forever. She's at the same time extremely capable at her job, and she knows it. Despite how unsure she may be in her personal relationships, she never backs down from what she knows to be right when it comes to her work. It's awesome to see a character who is really good at her job and also very passionate and loving, when the stereotype is often a hyper-capable woman who is frigid or eschews romance to focus on work. She also throws herself into learning about her powers with a dedication I wish I had for literally anything in my life. Granted, she does it because she feels like the weak link in the group. It's a type of single-minded dedication that is, again, usually paired with a borderline frigid woman who has no time for icky emotions when there's work to be done. I love seeing characters written like actual people who can be passionate about more than one thing at once. Also, I love that nobody really shames her for deciding to end things with Boyle. They don't really try to convince her to take him back. They don't pressure her. They trust that she has made the best decision for herself, and that is just wonderful. It's something that rarely happens in real life. In real life, she would probably be told that she overreacted and she should stop being such a bitch. To me, it's kind of like a model of how we should treat each other in general. Supporting each other's decisions, even if we may not agree with them at the time, and being supportive of our friends, even if we think we know what's best for them better than they do. And then when Iona decides to take Boyle back, it feels like the decision an actual person would make, rather than some box to tick off on the checklist of things that must happen in a romance story to have a happy ending. In this story, even the gruff, manly man Boyle doesn't shy away from expressing his affection for his friends, and once he learns how to communicate his feelings for Iona to her directly, he does so loudly and proudly. They interact like real people, but better. At every turn in this book, we see the women taking the reins and moving the story forward themselves. There are some moments where you consider Iona to be damseled, but she always fights back, even if she needs outside help to really free herself at first. And then as she comes into her power and is better able to control it, the times where she needs to be saved become fewer and fewer. The cast is evenly split with 3 women and 3 men. Though this book focuses on Iona, we also see the others interact and get a sense of their lives outside of their intended romantic partners. Because obviously by the end of the series, the 3 men and the 3 women are all going to be partnered up. Sorry, spoiler alert. What hooks me in this more than other romance stories is that the man isn't the goal. He's just a nice addition. The goal is the big magical enemy, and that's more my speed. After a lot of thinking, I can finally put my finger on why more normal world escapist stories don't really do it for me. They almost make me feel bad because they're just what a normal life would be like if it were just a little bit better, and it kind of makes me sad that I don't have that better life. I know that's completely irrational, and it's not a fault of anybody. It's not a fault of any writer or anybody at all. But I need the added element of magic or mystery or horror or spaceships or aliens or something just to make it far enough removed from real life that I can lose myself in the unreality of it all. Apparently Roberts has other books similar to this with the magic and stuff, and I'm gonna have to look them up. I've even talked my mom into reading this series because she's almost strictly a horror and fantasy reader, but I think she would love these as much as I do. Now, I've said all I really have to say about that. It's so wild because I haven't actually reread this one. I've read it recently enough that I still have pretty vivid memories of it and actually took some notes while reading it, even though I read it last year. I was dreaming of the far-off day when I would make a YouTube channel. But it's so fixed in my memory now that writing about it is bringing back the flood of sensations and specifically the smell of food. I don't think a book has made me this hungry since a Redwall book. Now that this is done, I think I'm going to go make a stew with a Guinness base and some Irish soda bread or something because I've got a mad appetite for it. I've been getting my final projects done the last few weeks and preparing for finals, so I'm looking forward to a few weeks from now when I can primarily focus my energy on the YouTube channel, and I appreciate you all sticking with me through this. I have a little over 30 subscribers now, and I am so completely floored by that number. I appreciate all of you, including all of my friends who have been humoring me since the very beginning. Thank you to my friend Theo, who is the one that lent me this book. She has a really cool Facebook page where she talks about witchcraft and all sorts of cool stuff like that, and I highly recommend following it if you're interested at all in learning about that world. I'll leave a link to it in the description for anybody who's interested. Thanks also to my patrons whose contributions are helping me stay fed nowadays. You can join my Patreon for as little as $2 a month, and I do things like polls for what books I will do next and stuff like that. If you want to check it out, head over to patreon.com/writingwomen. I think I might do a Patreon goal for starting to use my camera for videos instead of just my voice or something. And thank you to my current patrons, Mary Doc Brandybuck, Ms. Psycho, Amy Chu, aka The Doctor, and Bruce.